Hello, my name is Nike Pokoran. I come from the University of Ljubljana and from the Department of Translation Studies. My research interests are mainly translation away from your mother tongue, then the influence of ideology on translation, public service interpreting, then translation in diaspora, etc. In my research, I've mainly used traditional methods. And that is why we are making with my good friend Kaisa Koskinen a series of interviews on some different alternative methods that might be used also in our research. This video is made for the benefits of EUTOPIA Alliance for MA and PhD students who are interested in introducing new kind of methodologies in their research, but also, and last but not least, for the member institutions of the International Doctorate of Translation Studies. Kaisa, please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for having me in these discussions. My name is Kaisa Koskinen. I am a professor of translation studies at Tampere University, Finland, and I think today we are going to be talking about methods that link to my latest research interest for the past decade or so, the role of affect in translation and how emotions and reactions to emotions and the sociological ways that affects travel among us affect the understandings that we have on translation as translators or readers of translation, and also to my other ongoing or persistent interest, understanding how the constantly evolving professional life of translators and perhaps less to a lesser extent also interpreters is changing, is constantly changing. So there's a constantly changing landscape of professional translation, and there's a constant need to recalibrate our understanding of what the profession is like. So what we are going to be talking today is linked to these two elements in my research.
Yes, indeed. The topic of this interview is the use of love and breakup letters, as you call them, kind of usability research focusing on emotional responses, emotional narrative. You've recently published a monograph on the role of affects and emotions in different translatorial activities. The book with the title Translation and Affect was published in 2020 by John Benjamins. In this book and also in some other articles, you explored in a very innovative way the emotional attitude of translators, for example, towards technology that is recently radically changing our profession. And the methodological approach you use is the method of this of writing love or breakup letters to, for example, a tool that is currently used in our practice. Could you describe this method for those of our listeners who haven't heard of that before, how it is done?
Yes, this is indeed a very interesting method that I found in a usability research source book, 100 methods of usability research that you can use. I was at the time working together with my colleagues Tytti Suojanen and Tiina Tuominen on user-centered translation, and 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 that was one of the resources that we had to see what has been done in usability research and what might be perhaps useful for translation studies. And among the 100 methods, there were several that were interesting, but this one in particular kind of piqued my interest. It sounded like a very unexpected way to study usability, and it hasn't been used that much in usability research much as far as I know. So it is not a widely used usability research method, but I wanted to try out how it might play in in looking into translators' professional life. So what I did was that I I created an invitation letter and a very easy SurveyMonkey form to accompany this letter, and asked professional translators to respond to the uh, the invitation to write either a love letter or a breakup letter to any aspect of their working life that they felt compelled to do so. And it has been well received by respondents. So I think because we are researching a professional group of professional writers, they do not shy away from a very uh, perhaps a task that requires them to play a little bit and create a text. So they were happy to write the letters. Actually, most of the respondents wrote two of them, or both a love letter and a breakup letter. So they were quite enthusiastic about the task. I specifically did not want to at the beginning. I didn't want to restrict their possibilities to technological tools only, but my original idea was one of my research aims was to see what kind of a role it plays in comparison to many others. So in the data we have love letters to colleagues in translation, many of them actually, which is kind of nice, and also I think reflective of kind of a profession this is, and to the chair or the 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 bookshelf or whatever. So respondents chose many targets of love or hate in their letters, but it was fairly obvious that technology, different kinds of tools, were by far the most dominant one. And that's why in reporting the findings, I published one article in Finnish that kind of shows the entire palette, but in the international academic articles, the focus has been on technology. And it makes sense because it is a very prominent element in today's world, and also a changing one. So new tools are being introduced all the time, and they are entirely reshaping what you do in your practical work. So it's not surprising. What was perhaps also a background idea was to see whether translators are so technology averse as they are often depicted. This at least used to be the kind of the discourse that translators always are opposed to any new technology, and they are resistant to change, and they don't like this, and it was interesting to see whether this applies. So a number of background reasons made me try out this method. And once I started getting the first responses, I saw that this might be very interesting. So when I had the opportunity, I expanded to a more international respondent group. The first one was only in Finland and in Finnish, and then also the students in two different countries. So the data set is actually quite interesting also in revealing the similarities and differences between students and more senior professional translators, and also freelancers and in-house translators, and so on and so forth. So it proved more versatile and useful than I originally expected.
So you said that you found the description of the method in in a manual on usability research.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just briefly describe for those who are not familiar with this kind of research, what does usability research do?
The usability research is a long-standing research orientation that mainly focuses on the usability of website and sites and applications, but and digital tools. But obviously, usability could be the usability of anything can be researched. And I personally, in today's world where accessibility issues are becoming much more and more prominent all the time, I see a lot of connections there, that usability and accessibility research are very close to one another. And what we did in the user-centered translation project, we kind of brought what usability research can give to the study of the usability of translations. And this is closely linked to technical communication, where the usability of user manuals, for example, so textual documents, has been studied for quite some time. So it is usability research is uh, how should I put it? It is a very pragmatic field in terms of trying to indicate usability hiccups and improve different products so that users are better, are more satisfied and more able to use them.
To see whether the text or anything works for the intended purpose. Yes, and in some of your articles, you also discussed how you were aware that there are also other methods, for example, for technology. Quite prominent, such as technology acceptance model, and you decided not to. You preferred the other one. Do you think that's an important part of your research also to be aware of different methods and somehow to explicitly state why you prefer one to the other?
Indeed, indeed, and I think that's why it is good to read around to see what others have been doing, how others have been researching the topic that you want to research or something rather similar, and make decisions about sort of really contemplate whether you want to and need to do something in the same way that others have been doing, or whether you want to do something different, and if so, why. And this is a central element of any research design, to go through the different options and make informed decisions, and also informing the readers what you are doing, what are the sort of limitations, what are the benefits of what you are doing, and what would have been possible, and why you didn't want to go there. The the rationale behind why I, for example, didn't want to go to the technology acceptance models is also a researcher personality issue. And this is also something that we might want to acknowledge. And it's good to reflect on that maybe early on already in your career. For kinds, we are perhaps we have tendencies and inclinations to go into one direction or the other, and it's easy to see that, for example, some researchers are very social and they want to interact with people, and others are like, no, 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 absolutely not, I want to study the data in my own privacy, and I don't want to talk to anyone. And once you recognize what are your strengths and weaknesses, then your choices can reflect also on what you do best. And I can see easily that trying out something new is something that makes me tick. For somebody else, it could be really, really painful and would make them anxious, because you don't, if you start out by the idea that you want to try something that doesn't necessarily work, you need to accept that it might not work. And this is something that is intolerable to some, and might be very difficult for a PhD project. So I think I'm in a perhaps elite position, in the sense that I can sometimes devote my time into trying out something that could go badly wrong and end up sort of producing no results whatsoever. So it is necessary for everyone to judge whether you are choosing the right method for your project and your research questions, and also the right methods for you personally, and then go ahead.
This is a good piece of advice. How do you design such a study? What do you have to prepare beforehand? Are there any instructions? That what kind of instructions, in fact, do you give to your subjects?
That this is something that requires careful thinking, and is kind of tricky in today's world, when you are absolutely required to tell your subjects what the study is about, but then at the same time you want them to give their responses free of the the expectations that they think you have, because this is a known factor, for example, in interview study, that interviewees tend to try to please the interviewer, and you obviously as an interviewer you don't want this, and this was really tricky for me also in this is in giving instructions to these love letters and breakup letters, that I needed to explain a method that was also new to the respondents. I was asking them to do something they did not necessarily expect a researcher to ask, and at the same time try to make it as open-ended as possible, so that they wouldn't think that I'm kind of trying to push them into one direction, for example. So it is a balancing act nowadays in what how you inform your students, because you need to do that, but then you can't do too much of that, so that it doesn't kind of eat away your results. So a tricky thing for this particular method. I felt that still the preparatory work was not too complicated, because this is in terms of questionnaires, this must be one of the easiest to produce, because I only had a couple of background questions, so that I could sort of compare for example, the in-house and freelance, and how long you have been in the business, or how old you are, and this is basically what I asked, and then an open slot for the one question that I had. So in comparison to the much more complex questionnaires, where you need to very carefully design your questions, and preferably have them pre-vetted and tested, and make sure that you have the statistical correlances and everything. So uh, this is a much more free form element. And I actually used the SurveyMonkey for the Finnish professional translators, and then pen and paper for the other sets, where I actually met the people face to face. But then also, because I was collecting data incrementally, not at one go, but incrementally, I in analyzing the data, I needed to pay attention to the context where this happened. So, for example, for the institutional translators, I collected the data in conjunction with a guest lecture on particular topics. So I needed to think about whether I was priming them first into particular elements in their thinking about particular elements in their working life, and then asking them to write the letters, and whether that had an effect. The same with the students. They were for both sets of students the same situation. So you need to somehow be aware of not only the documentation, not only the tool that you are creating, but also the context where everything happens, and how you perhaps, uh, without even realizing it, might be pushing the responses into a particular direction.
Thank you. I'll just connect my next question to what you'll be saying. I imagine that analyzing data from such love letters and hate letters must be a difficult task. How did you do it?
Indeed, when I was started collecting the data, I had no idea of how many responses I would even be getting, and when they were 150 love letters and breakup letters, it was a little bit unexpected. I was lucky enough to get one of my colleagues, Minna Ruokonen, to join me, and it is because of her expertise in using Excel that we managed to create a system where we could analyze the data sets in different ways and for different purposes and from different angles, and make sense of the responses, because if you have a very free form writing task, even categorizing the letters was not straightforward at all, and you needed to categorize them several times, because they were moving from one topic to another, and midway a particular letter might turn from a love letter into a breakup letter, and the target would be the same the same tool, and so we needed something that allowed us to systematize everything, and this is something that perhaps people like me, who are very inclined to use small data sets and qualitative analysis, we might sometimes think that we don't need it, that we don't need to carefully categorize and systematize our approach, but it actually is perhaps even more important in qualitative analysis, where you don't have the number crunching tools help you do that. For me, I've actually used Excel later again, because I felt that was actually the easiest way of keeping things under control. I know I could have used some qualitative data analysis tool as well, but Excel was enough for me, or for us at that point, and it has been ever since. But whatever you use, it is good to have a very systematizing step in your analysis. But I would like to perhaps also add that if you're doing qualitative analysis, you can't stop there. And today that we have these digital tools, and we are expected to use them, the risk, I think, is that we end up being rather quantitative also in our qualitative analysis, because the tools allow us to do that, and it's then easy to report. You actually end up producing numbers which is a little bit misaligned with your original data collection and approach. So there's a little bit of a risk, I think, in today's world in becoming too quantitative in your qualitative analysis, and we try to move away from that into also producing interpretations uh, that take us away from the numbers of letters in a particular category, and looking into the kind of the contextualized understanding of what this tells us about the profession. I don't know if we were very successful in that. With hindsight, maybe we were also sort of caught in the Excel way of thinking in our reporting. But I think this is something that we are not talking about enough, maybe, that what these new qualitative analysis methods are doing to our understanding of what qualitative analysis even is about.
Mm. Well, yes, it's tempting because you can somehow more substantiate your claims that something is prevailing. And I think that's why
Yeah.
we all tend to love them at one point. What would be for you positive, and what the negative aspects of this method?
Um, the positive aspects would be linked to, I think, to um, the the enthusiasm with which respondents uh, replied to it. So it was definitely a method that was didn't meet with resistance from the participants. Uh, Professional translators are known for their willingness to participate in many kinds of endeavors. So this is not perhaps major, but for some fields and in some countries and in some contexts, it might be difficult to get participants to a particular project. So for this one, it was never an issue, and it didn't take too much of their time. And I think it also allowed to question some of the prevailing ideas and understandings. For example, it became very evident that translators do not hate technology. They hate technology when it doesn't function, when it as we all know, it it is. I think this is common to everyone, but I think it was useful in terms of shaking a little bit the perceived understanding, and also what we have perhaps internalized about what translators are like, and how they approach technology. The negative aspect, I had something in mind, but now I
Maybe
forgot.
the analysis, no? I would guess it
No,
would.
the analysis was actually, once we got, yeah, originally yes, I was like, what the heck am I going to do with this? But once we found Excel, it became quite easy, and I regret that we have a number of articles that could still be written on this, but there's been no time. So I think it was productive in ways of raising particular issues that kind of then kind of indicating what might one might want to look into further. So it was it was perhaps good in that sense. But I had something in mind about the negative aspect that I now forget. Let me think.
Maybe it will come to you later. If you
Yeah.
had the opportunity and time to do the research again, is there anything that you would have changed in your methodological approach?
If I now repeated it, I would definitely not take a piecemeal approach to data collection. It was not well planned. It was not planned to repeat this. It was I took the opportunity when the invitations came to go to different places, but this created a little bit of a maybe shakiness in terms that it was not exactly the same kind of situation and same kind of collection methods. So I definitely would change that and be perhaps more sort of I would try to plan ahead better to collect data from particular kinds of participants. So this was now like an open-ended invitation, and who replied. But I might want to perhaps collect data in a more well thought out manner from, for example, translators working in different sectors, or translators and interpreters, or students and translators. So I think it was not as well balanced as it could have been if it was designed in a more careful manner.
So, the selection of your population is always a very important
Yeah.
part of your research, isn't it? Um, are there any ethical, particularly ethical considerations that you found out when doing this research? Is there any advice in this particular area that you would give to prospective students and researchers?
Uh, well, I think what applies is that when your respondents generously give you their time and their thoughts, and kind of some of the letters really are actually quite touching also. So you need to respect that and somehow try to respond to the community in a respectful manner in terms of trying to reflect back somehow truthfully what they were saying. And this goes for all kinds of research designs when you are dealing with people. So a lot of research actually in one way or another is based on data that has been produced by somebody. So that definitely might be. Other than that, I think I this is there's fairly, it depends on the background information also. Obviously I didn't collect too much of it. So
You know
the
why I'm asking? Because this seems to be somewhere in between a questionnaire and an interview. So, did you use consent forms?
um not for the survey monkey. The thinking was that if you
It's
fill in, yeah,
like a
if yeah, you kind of,
questionnaire.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'm trying to remember now. I think I had a separate form for the students. I'm not entirely sure. It was for all these data sets where I was in the same room. It was explicitly stated that you don't need to, because obviously students are within an institutional setting, and the other one was professionals in a setting where their employer is organizing an event. So it was made very explicit that you do not need to submit. But I think I probably didn't have this. This was 7 years ago now that I collected the data, so I don't remember for sure, but I don't think I had a separate consent
Would you
form.
do it now? What do
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
You would
GDPR.
do it
I
just
would
for
do it now. Yeah, I
for-
would do many things differently. I needed to do an ethical prior vetting to one of the student groups in their university system. So I needed to go through that, but not for the other sections. So it depends on. This is tricky now, I think. has been for quite some time, because different universities, different countries have different rules for humanities research and what you need to do. And this is, at least in Finland, this is constantly changing. So it's difficult to know what you need to do, and what you need to do prior to your data collection, what you need to do during your data collection, and what you need to do afterwards, and how to store your data, and all of this is becoming much more restricted. So I think definitely now I would have a separate consent form from all participants. But this, I personally, I feel this is not very invasive, so I'm not overly concerned about the ethical issues. But some contexts, for example, when you are doing research, like Nike is doing research with community interpreting settings, there are much more vulnerable people involved,
There
and you
you
need to
need
be,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
you need to be very much more careful. And this is a kind of a less invasive method. And if you are asking for volunteers who are okay to say no, and you are not asking too many personal details, and so on and so forth, so this is easier than some other contexts. But I think for any research design nowadays, you need to think through all of these questions. Nikki, I now remember what I wanted to say about the negative
Please
side.
do.
It was about the issue of affect, emotion, and narration. So obviously, if you want to study our anybody's emotional reactions or responses, and you ask them to verbalize, which is what I did. I asked them to verbalize, and also at a meta level, you are one or two steps away from the actual emotion. And this is a question that is actually, it is a negative aspect that is not easily resolvable. So what we can do, we can add sensors, and measure heartbeat, or whether the palms are sweaty, or eye tracking, or whatever, and we can try to get to the physiological aspects of emotions, but we're still a little bit away from the what it actually is about. And this is I don't think this has been resolved, or maybe it never will in any other discipline either. That because emotions and affects are a kind of a combination of physiological and psychological, and then also social, because we are socialized to think about particular aspects in a particular manner. We are and these socializations also trigger emotions in us. So a combination of all these elements, you need, and you, if you're trying to get to the bottom of it, is it's actually very tricky. So you need to perhaps also just simply remember what you are dealing with. So when we are analyzing the love letters, we try to keep in mind that these are not the uh, actual emotions that we can for sure claim that a particular respondent has towards a particular tool or aspect of their work. But this is something that they decided to, they remembered, that came to their mind, and they wanted to share, and they narrated in a particular manner. So there's a number of layers of interpretations between the researcher and the actual emotion that we are perhaps trying to capture.
Mm. Indeed, it's a very tricky area that you went into, and I suppose it can also affect you and the
Yeah.
others with the questions you ask. So, thank you very much, Kaisa. Thank you for your time. Thank you for explaining this very exciting method to us all. You can find that method explained in the book I've mentioned, but also in articles written by Kaisa and Mina Ruokonen, Love Letters or Hate Mail, Translators' Technology Acceptance in the Light of Their Emotional Narratives. So thank you very much again for your attention, and I hope you'll find this invitation to introduce new methods in your research inspiring.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.